I still remember the first moment it happened, because it didn't start with footsteps or voices or even something logical. It started with a scream tearing through the woods behind my newly purchased 150-year-old cabin mansion, a scream so sharp it echoed across the lake like someone had been stabbed. "That's my son's inheritance," the woman shrieked, and before I even saw her face, I felt the cold snap of dread run down my spine. But before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from, because trust me, this one spirals fast, and it all started the first week I moved into that forgotten piece of history tucked beyond the HOA gates. I had bought the place at an estate auction, an old timber-framed mansion that looked like the woods had been guarding it for generations. The floors were crooked, the windows clouded, and the roof groaned at night like the house was remembering something. But it felt peaceful, almost sacred, especially after years of city noise grinding me down. Every morning the smell of pine sap and wet leaves drifted in, and sunlight filtered through dust like tiny gold sparks, making the old cabin feel alive. It was supposed to be my quiet restart, my private project, a restoration dream, but peace in an HOA neighborhood is a luxury, one they defend like territory. I'd barely unpacked when the first sign of trouble came, a clipped note taped to my truck. "Report to HOA office immediately, unauthorized structure." They were talking about the cabin that clearly existed before the HOA itself. I laughed it off, assuming a clerical mistake, and went back to stripping rot off the porch beams. But as my hammer echoed through the empty forest, I couldn't shake the sense I was being watched. Birds stopped chirping whenever I worked. Branches snapped where no one should have been, and sometimes, just out of sight, I heard a woman's irritated huff, like someone silently judging every nail I replaced. By week 2, my restoration project had become the neighborhood's main attraction. A few neighbors walked by pretending to exercise, but their eyes lingered, whispering like the house itself had offended them. Then came the whispers, literal ones, from 2 HOA board members who didn't realize I was on the other side of the hedges. "That's her cabin," a man muttered. "She's been waiting years for the probate to finalize." The woman next to him hissed, "Well, too late now, he bought it, and she is not taking it well." I froze, gripping my work gloves, wondering who she was and why she thought the cabin belonged to her. I got my answer the next morning when a woman in a stiff blazer marched down my dirt driveway like she owned the soil beneath her feet. She didn't introduce herself. She simply threw a stapled packet at my chest. "This property was promised to my son," she snapped, her voice dripping entitlement thicker than the syrup that used to be harvested from these woods. "You bought it illegally." I blinked at her, confused, flipping through the papers. Nothing but unfiled handwritten claims and highlighted sections of HOA rules that didn't apply to me. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "the HOA doesn't control this land. This is county jurisdiction." Her eyes twitched with rage, and she leaned in, whispering, "We'll see about that." I had no idea then how far she'd go, or what secrets the cabin the next few days were a storm without rain. Silent, but heavy, thick with tension I could feel in my bones. Every morning I woke to new violations taped to my door. Noise complaints, unauthorized repairs, environmental disturbance for cutting a dead tree that was literally about to fall on the porch. I knew exactly who was behind it, even before I caught her watching from the tree line with binoculars like I was a criminal dismantling federal property. Each time I looked her way, she ducked back into the shadows, but not fast enough to hide the rage twisting her expression. Something wasn't normal about her obsession. It felt personal, unhinged, like she wasn't fighting for rules. She was fighting for a fantasy. One afternoon, while hauling out decaying timber, I overheard her again, but this time she wasn't whispering. She was shouting into her phone at someone, pacing in front of the forest like a territorial wolf. "He can't have it. That cabin belongs to my family," she barked. "My great-grandfather built it, and it was supposed to skip straight to my son after probate. The auction was illegitimate. I will get it back." My pulse kicked up. I'd read the deed history. The last owner had no kids. The line ended, nothing about a generational claim, and yet, Here she was rewriting history with the ferocity of someone clinging to a collapsing narrative. When her eyes snapped to me, full of hatred, I realized she knew I'd heard everything. That night, I heard something scrape across the porch, a soft metal sound, slow, intentional. When I opened my door, a rusted lockbox sat in the center of the wooden planks, no note, no explanation. I crouched down, heart rattling, and lifted the lid. Inside were old, weather-worn photographs, sepia images of families posing in front of the cabin decades ago. But none of them matched the woman's face, not even remotely, and buried at the bottom was the real twist, a deed fragment from 1874 with a family name I recognized. Not hers, the cabin didn't belong to her ancestors. It belonged to a completely different bloodline, someone else entirely, someone she wasn't connected to. The realization hit hard. She wasn't protecting heritage. She was trying to steal it. The next morning, she returned with reinforcements, 2 HOA board members, and a clipboard thick with forged urgency. Vacate the premises immediately, she announced loudly enough for neighbors to peer from driveways. This property is under HOA dispute. I stepped forward slowly, holding the lockbox behind my back. This land predates your HOA by over a century, I said. You have no authority here. The board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly less confident than she was. But she jabbed her finger toward me, shrieking, "You're trespassing on my son's inheritance. You'll be removed by force, if necessary." The crowd murmured. Phones lifted. She didn't realize yet. Her lie was about to crack open. And it cracked faster than I expected, because I pulled the original deed fragment from the box and held it high. Her face drained as neighbors leaned in, whispering, "Funny," I said, my voice calm despite the adrenaline. "Your family name isn't on this, not even close." She lunged for it, snarling, but the crowd gasped and stepped between us, and in that moment, rage blazing in her eyes, I realized she wasn't delusional. She was desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. Before I could even process the shift in her expression, she spun toward the crowd and screamed, "He stole that from me. That's my family document." But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. Her panic was too sudden, too sharp, like someone whose entire scheme was falling apart in front of witnesses. Phone cameras were angled at her from every direction, catching every twitch of her face. Her voice cracked as she tried again. "My son was supposed to inherit. This man cheated us." But the board members had already stepped back, distancing themselves as if her madness was contagious. The HOA had power, but even they couldn't salvage a collapsing lie. I turned to the crowd and opened the lockbox for them to see. Inside, the name on the deed fragment matched the original county records, the ones I had printed from the courthouse myself. "This cabin mansion was owned by the Beaumont family," I said. "There is zero connection to her family tree." A neighbor nodded, confirming he'd heard the same thing years back. When she saw people believing me, something in her snapped. She lunged forward, grabbed the lockbox, and hurled it toward the trees, screaming incoherently. Photographs fluttered like startled birds, scattering across the forest floor. The sight froze everyone. This wasn't anger anymore. This was unraveling. She charged at me next, but 2 neighbors restrained her, holding her back as she kicked and shouted. "You ruined everything. My son was supposed to get this house," she wailed, tears streaking down her face. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity, until she spat out the truth she'd been hiding. If the cabin stayed abandoned for 1 more year, the family trust would transfer the land to us. We were counting on it. The crowd fell silent. She had just confessed the entire scheme. She wasn't an heir. She wasn't a descendant. She was staking her future on a loophole that never materialized because I bought the cabin legally before the deadline, and now everyone knew. The police arrived not long after, called by neighbors who watched the entire spectacle unfold. When officers questioned me, I calmly handed them the properly recorded deed, the purchase documents, and even the historical papers I'd found in the lockbox. They questioned her next, and she crumbled under the pressure, babbling half truths and contradictions as her son arrived, mortified, whispering apologies to anyone who'd listen. The officers eventually escorted her away for harassment, attempted property fraud, and destruction of historical documents. Her son promised to repair the damage, pay fines, and begged the HOA board to remove her from any decision making. The board agreed immediately. The HOA later issued me a written apology, formal, stiff, clearly written by a lawyer, but an apology nonetheless. They retracted every citation, erased every fabricated violation, and declared the cabin mansion outside HOA jurisdiction permanently. In the following weeks, neighbors brought pies, welcomed me properly, and even helped me restore the cabin's front steps. The old mansion finally felt peaceful again. No more binoculars, no more accusations, no more entitled screams echoing through the trees. Just wood settling, wind humming, and the quiet reassurance that history was safe again.